Good afternoon and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our session. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the President of the World Jewish Congress, Ambassador Ronald Lauder, to address us and to start this conference. We all had the pleasure of seeing Ambassador Lauder earlier this week when we were glued to our screens in watching the highest honor of the World Jewish Congress, the Theodor Herzl Award, being awarded to Mr. Antonio Guterres of the United Nations in recognition of the work that he has done there to end some of the fixation on the State of Israel. And this, of course, is the highest honor of the Congress. And it was an amazing presentation that we were all part of seeing. And we had also 3 members of our program, 3 JDs, that had the ability to be part of this program for the first time. And of course, we hope that this is something that we will be doing on a recurring basis. Alana Barno from South Africa, Ila Baumel from Germany, and MJ Kornfeld from Israel. So President Lauder, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And thank you all the JDs who are here today listening in. I must tell you, Alana, Gila, and MJ did a superb job of representing the JDs. I was enormously impressed by them and what they spoke, how they spoke about. And it showed very, very much how important it is to get our message out to everybody. In the past, when we did the Herzl dinner, we had maybe 300, 400, 500 people there, and no one else saw it. This time, I was speaking with Ram today. He said up to 1 million people have looked at it. And that tells us, what it told us is many different meanings. First of all, that we're one people. Secondly, the World Jewish Congress is truly the umbrella organization of the entire Jewish world. And thirdly, that we have young people who are our future leaders. This, to me, is the most important aspect we have, because what we're looking for is leadership. And we're looking for leadership, and at the same time, we're looking for the fact of unity. We have a major job to do, and that is to convince young people about being Jewish, what it means to be Jewish. I spoke about the importance of education and having more and more Jewish schools, 100 Jewish schools, maybe in America, 100, another 100 throughout the world, or as many as we can do. And that's also affordable, because many Jews we are losing, young Jewish people, because they don't know what Judaism is about. They're 3rd generation after the Holocaust. The second aspect is we learned more and more that only 30–40% of children going to school today know about the Holocaust, what it stands for. And that's a major thing we have. We have a great deal of education ahead of us. And this is what I'm looking for the JDs to work closely with us as one organization to try to build a whole question of education and people learning. We also have a dearth of leadership, and I'm looking for the JDs to fill that gap in all the countries they're at. There's a great deal that has to be done. One of the things we're talking about now is to build a leadership school in Europe, perhaps in Paris, where JDs can go for a week session or a 2-week session to learn about the secrets of how to do true leadership. Many of you know these things, but there's a lot that can be learned, particularly about the ways of giving speeches. There's so much to be done. At the same time, we could not have invented a better organization than the World Jewish Congress. And the World Jewish Congress could not have invented a better organization than the JDs. I must tell you how proud I was to listen to the 3 people who spoke, but also to know that there were another 300 of you behind them who are all ready and able to do many great things. As I spoke in the past, I think we have to make it so that there's 400 to 500 JDs throughout the world. In any country we don't have JDs, we have to have them. And I must tell you, I cannot be more proud of what you're doing. Today we're talking about racism. You'll hear different speeches. I think the key thing that was said by Nikki Haley at the last Russell Award last year, when she said anti-Semitism is racism. And the more we talk about anti-Semitism as another form of racism, the stronger we are, because people don't realize that anti-Semitism is a form of racism. It is racism. And therefore it gives us much more latitude to stand up and be counted. Also, as I mentioned in my speech, you can disagree with Israel's policies, but if you disagree with Israel and try to exist, then you look at it and you say, this is another form of racism and anti-Semitism. Because if you're against Israel's right to exist, you are not just anti-Israel, you're anti-Semitic and therefore a racist. I think it's very, very important. And we're looking very closely at the BDS movement and seeing what that's happened. And there, the theme is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which means no more Israel. That's what their goal is. We have to do everything we can to stop it and stop BDS and start making colleges, universities, a place where people can learn both sides of the thing, but learn and not be afraid to talk out what they believe in. Anyway, you're a wonderful group. I'm so proud to be the president of the World Jewish Congress. I'm so proud of the JDs. I'm so proud of all the people standing up and fighting against anti-Semitism and racism. God bless you all. And now I've said my piece. Thank you for those who are listening. And again, I really appreciate everything you're doing, because you are our future. And unless you're able to bring other people with us, we have a different future ahead of us. I believe the future of Jews can be fantastic if we believe in the fact that we're one people. Thank you all. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, President Lauder, for those very kind words with regards to the JDCorps. And of course, we could not do any of this without your vision, without your support, and without your continuous engagement like today. And we're very appreciative of you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today and to honor the opening of this conference. Thank you very much, sir.
President Lauder, on behalf of the JDCorps, I would like to thank you so much for being here and addressing us this evening. It really is an honor. And I would also like to take the opportunity to express my deep gratitude for the incredible honor of participating in the Herzl Awards dinner. It really was such an outstanding evening, and it was so much fun to be a part of. It was a real privilege to represent the JDCorps and to listen into your words of wisdom and to be amongst such illustrious company. And I think I speak on behalf of all the JDs when I say how deeply grateful we are for the incredible platform and opportunities that you give us as the flagship program of the World Jewish Congress. And we are grateful to you for your leadership and for everything that you do for us. So thank you so much, President Lauder.
Thank you a lot for what you said. I really appreciate it.
So as President Lauder said a little bit more than a year ago at his address in Rome at the Pontifical University, we must fight hatred together. If we stand united, we will be so much stronger in this fight. And this is, of course, the focus of this conference that we're starting now. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the World Jewish Congress Jewish Diplomatic Corps Global Conference, United Against Racism. I'd like to start off by thanking President Lauder and welcoming our speakers for the remainder of the session. We have Mr. Derrick Johnson of the NAACP, welcome. We have Dr. Andrea Bartoli of the Sant'Egidio Foundation. We have Dr. Mustafa Ceric of the World Bosniak Congress, and we have Ms. Simin Fahandej of the Baha'i International Community. Thank you so much all for being part of this event, and thank you so much for supporting the joint efforts that we're doing here today. And of course, I'd like to welcome all of the members of the JDCorps program that are with us here today. It is a pleasure seeing all of you. Believe me when I say from the heart that we miss you and we miss being in the same room with you. We're still stuck in our individual Zoom rectangles also for this conference, but God willing, next year we will have the opportunity to see you all in an in-person session, and we know that the energy that's being generated when we're all gathered together, as Ambassador Lauder also alluded to, this group is truly amazing. It has an energy, it has a vision in terms of creating a better future for the Jewish communities and for the world, and it's really astounding when we do get together. So let's hope that will happen soon in the future. Elie Wiesel famously stated that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And indifference, being one of the most insidious threats against our society, can only be countered with action. And bearing these words of Wiesel in mind, we've designed this conference as a 2-week endeavor, where we, during the first week, we aim both to inform and to empower all of the members of the JDCorps to learn from each other and to learn from high-level experts on topics such as implicit bias, such as bridge building, such as the African American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance, where we have 24 sessions planned over 2 weeks with 18 external speakers, which is really a remarkable amount of knowledge for you to access. We also wish for you, especially during the second week, to roll up the sleeves and to do a concrete outreach where we have 30 organizations, being them local, regional, or global, lined up for you to start that work. And we know that many of you are already active in this space, and we want to enable all of you to do so. You will interact with these organizations for the duration of the second week, which brings us really to a 2-week conference with ample opportunity. And we're in this for the long run. These relationships that you build is something that we start here today, but this conference is a starting point. It is not the end goal. So we're very proud to be presenting you with a very ambitious program for the next 2 weeks. Now, in designing the program, the JDCorps team also recognized the need that in addition to addressing a lack of societal knowledge and understanding when it comes to combating racism, there are also other factors at play that we need to include in a conference such as today, such as feelings of value and privilege, implicit bias within our societies. And these factors sometimes are even more pertinent and dangerous to our society and then those clear acts of racial violence that's very easy for us to identify and to condemn. And we find these attitudes in our workplace, in academic sessions, and in social sessions. And it's really about where do we draw the line? What's acceptable to our society? And we want for that to be part of our discussion as well. We also know that when we deal with haters, sometimes we're dealing with feelings of inferiority rather than superiority. And we also know that in times of crisis, and this is something that the Jewish group, of course, is all too familiar with alongside other minority groups, in times of crisis, minority groups are always the target. It just depends which one of these minority groups is turned to now face that burden. And finally, we know that although we are very proud of working together with organizations, we should not forget the need to address hearts and minds on an individual level. No one is perfect, everybody can learn more, and it's really up to each and every one of us as an individual to effectuate real change. I'd like to thank the amazing JDCorps staff team for helping putting together this conference, Ifat, Gabriel, Isaac, Victor, all of our staff colleagues at the WJC, and of course all of the JDs that helped put together the program and that will be part of the program in terms of its execution as moderators or as expert speakers. I'd like to thank the JDCorps Steering Committee. Again, this is a virtual session. We are doing this as a surrogate for conferences. But of course, we all know that at conference we have those informal discussions which are no less important than the formal sessions. So the Steering Committee will be hosting a virtual coffee break at 2:30 p.m. every day. That's 8:30 in Europe. So in Europe, it's more of an after-work drink, really, where you have that opportunity to brainstorm, to share in an informal session your experiences. We wish to bring that in to this conference as well. And this is a new format for us as a JDCorps. We hope to learn from all of you. We are looking for your feedback and for your feedback also in terms of what elements of this can we do as part of future events. Now, if we are all part of the future of Jewish leadership, as President Lauder remarked upon earlier, And we know that President Lauder places a lot of his hope of the Jewish future on your shoulders. That's a serious task, and we know that you take it seriously, and obviously we at the JDCorps team do so as well. And as part of that task, we do need to fight injustice, and we do need to fight hatred where we see it. We need to build alliances well beyond the Jewish community, and that's something that you all will be doing and have been doing as part of your previous work, and it's something that we wish to support. This is President Lauder's vision, and we know it's a vision that you share. Now, I started off by quoting Elie Wiesel, and I'd like to round off by quoting my 9-year-old son, Nathan. Now, during this tumultuous summer here in New York, he looked at what was happening in the streets, and he wanted to ask me about background and about potential ways forward. And having received some of these answers, being of an inquisitive mind, he told me, Dad, if it has taken 250 years for us to get to this point in America, there's surely a lot more work to be done. So in the spirit of a lot more work to be done, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. And it's my absolute privilege to hand the word and the virtual microphone over to my friend, my brother in arms, the chair of the WJC JDCorps Steering Committee, Elie Novershtern. Elie, please.
Thank you, dear brother in arms, Daniel. Thank you all for the wonderful work in putting this meeting together. I have to say these are times of great challenge to everyone, not just to Jewish communities, but to all communities, and I think to minority communities, especially worldwide. And in times of great need and in times of great strife and great division, I think it's our duty to rise above the division and to try to find the unifying aspects, to try to build bridges, to try to extend hands. And this is exactly what this virtual conference is all about. It's us trying to rise to the occasion during these very unique times and trying to work together with other minority communities and other communities of faith. And it is exactly in this spirit that I wish to introduce to you our key speaker for this part of the conference. It is a distinct honor for me to be able to introduce to you Derrick Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. Mr. Johnson is a lifelong civil rights activist, but I think more importantly for us as leaders of minority communities all over the world, we have leaders of Jewish communities in over 50 countries represented here. I think more importantly for us, he's also a communal leader and has dedicated much of his life to improve lives and communities of the people in Mississippi and all over the United States. I think in both his communal roles and in his national role, Mr. Johnson's leadership has been characterized by what we call in Hebrew, ometz lev, meaning not just courage, but courage that comes from the heart, and a heart that is longing for what is right and what is moral and what is just, all fear aside. Mr. Johnson, I think, has led his life and his leadership positions under the moral imperative that we all must bring a moral view to society in order for it to be free. As the recently deceased Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory said, social freedom can only be sustained by those with, I quote, a concern for the welfare of others, an active commitment to justice and compassion, a willingness to ask not just what is good for me, but what is good for all of us together, end quote. And I think, sadly, today there are so many injustices and inequalities in each of our respective countries and in the world in general that are in need of remedy and repair. I think we should all remember what Dr. Martin Luther King stated in his inspirational I Have a Dream speech, where he alluded to the universal prophet Amos, or Amos in Hebrew, when he said, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So it is in this spirit of collaboration and in this dedication to the service of these goals that it is my great pleasure to welcome on behalf of the World Jewish Congress, the Jewish Diplomatic Corps, to address us, President of the NAACP, Mr. Derrick Johnson. Mr. Johnson, thank you very much for joining us this morning or evening.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Let me ask, in these times of great need and perhaps great division, how do you see the unique role of the NAACP? And what are your goals during these very tumultuous times for all of us?
NAACP is the nation's oldest civil rights organization, started 111 years ago. And it was created in the aftermath of what many people understand to be the redemption period. And that was a period of retaliation by Southern whites who took up arms against this nation, and they lost their citizenship. And they took up arms to maintain a system of dominating and controlling modes of production through the use of slavery and enslaving people from the African continent. As a result of those Africans, and I say Africans because they were not citizens of the United States, they were denied knowledge of their countries of origins on the continent. Those individuals fighting for their liberations, taking up arms, reinforcing Union troops, reinforcing Sherman's army that marched through the South, resulting in the defeating of this concept of white supremacy, a concept that was not only seen in the United States, but had begun to spread across the globe, a concept that's based on a racial social construct that excluded many people from being a part of that privileged posture, I will call it. All of us on this call, whether you was a member of the Jewish faith, if you were Catholic, if you was from the African continent, if you was from Italy, and many other countries or beliefs, you were isolated outside of the concept of being white. White was only reserved for those who were Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So if you didn't believe in the same things, if you didn't come from the same region of Europe, you was excluded from this construct of being white. In the United States, we carried that caste system to another level. Now, we've seen caste systems in other countries, particularly in India. And in India, is perhaps the most pervasive, and that's debatable depending on one's perspective. So the NAACP was created in that backdrop, and it was a group of African Americans by this time, because they took up arms and they fought in the Civil War. They defeated the Confederate troops. They were rewarded with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And I'm going through this history because I understand this is a global audience, so we have a really context of why the NAACP exists and our roles moving forward. With the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to our Constitution, it gave those Africans who are now American citizens rights and privileges entitled to any other citizen in this country. And that period lasted about 10 years, called Reconstruction. And during the Reconstruction period, it was contentious because the true nature of the Civil War had more to do with economic systems than it did with the morality of holding people in bondage. It was whether or not rich, quote, white guys in the North could establish an industrial-based economy as their mode of production to generate wealth, or rich white guys in the South can maintain an agricultural-based economy, which was overly dependent on the bondage of human to produce and generate the raw materials for sale to the superpowers of the time in Europe. That was the true nature of the Civil War, which is really important now because it was about money. It was about control of modes of production. It was about controlling and dominating systems. You fast forward, you had a group of African Americans W.E.B. Du Bois and William Monroe Trotter, Ida B. Wells, who decided to meet to begin to address the sharp turn and policy direction from honoring the commitment of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of our Constitution and allowing African Americans to truly participate as citizens, both with their labor, their ability to collectively bargain. And there was a sharp pushback against that. Former Confederate soldiers, as a result of another business deal that were cut, were readmitted back into the Union, and they aggressively began to push a set of policies that excluded African Americans, a set of policies that excluded the Jewish community, that excluded Irish who happened to be Catholic, that excluded so many people who didn't fall under the definition of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So they formed the Niagara movement. That very next year, there was a race riot in Springfield, Illinois. And there were a group of individuals, Mary Wright Overton and others, some of the Jewish faith, who decided to say, we cannot have the necessary protection as a community, as a Jewish community, as an Irish community, if we don't band together and establish an advocacy organization to set a public policy federal framework to protect people, because lynching became so commonplace that one historian said there was a person lynched every day for an entire year. So the group of individuals in response to for the Springfield lynching, and the group of African Americans, they agreed to meet in New York. And out of that meeting, they established the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. African Americans were identified as colored.
The result of minorities coming together, in a sense.
That was absolutely the result of minorities coming together. Fusion politics at its best, establishing an advocacy voice to protect all of us in a federal policy landscape that honored our individual equal rights to fully engage. Really important, because in the American legal system, your status is important for your protection. The first advocacy program we took on was anti-lynching legislation that gave the federal government the ability to go into local jurisdictions to investigate, prosecute, and convict those involved with this mob violence that we see also common across the country. The second big campaign we took on was in response to a motion picture release in 1915 called Birth of a Nation. And in this release, this is really important for both the African American community and the Jewish community. This movie depicted the savagery of these Africans who were descended upon the virtual nature of this white woman, and how they had captured her, and the cavalry came in and they wore these sheets over their head, and it was the Ku Klux Klan, the Christian Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, who ride in and save the damsel in distress. That organization that was founded by former Confederate soldiers who were defeated during the Civil War, that organization that during this period of time was actually fledgling and dying off, received more energy, so much so by 1930, we've seen a reemergence of the Klan. NAACP, we advocated against the movement. We pushed to stop the release. We pushed for the President Woodrow Wilson from not showing the film in the White House. But because he showed that film in the White House, because this became a blockbuster film, we found that many of those same individuals, whether you came from the Jewish community, the Irish community, the Black community, were now under attack. In Boston, Irish need not apply. There were many schools that barred admission to individuals who practice in the Jewish faith, part of the Jewish community. African Americans, because our skin tone cannot rub off, we can't change our names, we cannot speak a different version of the English, the King's English, so to speak. We were always going to be readily identified as a cheap, readily available cheap source of labor. And because of that, we continue with our mission to improve the quality of life of those who are impacted but most importantly, to fight against discrimination wherever it exists.
So thank you for those illuminating remarks on the birth of the NAACP. I did not know how much of a coalition aspect it had at its very beginning, which was illuminating for me. And from those important roots taken to 2020 and our difficult times today, what do you view as the unique role of the NAACP during these times?
You know, I went through that long history lesson. About my staff always say, stop with all the history. It's important because what we see today is rooted in the reality of the past. The fact that Woodrow Wilson in 1915 would invite those who seek to maintain a system of tribalism into the White House, it opened up for for it to be okay, socially accepted, for people to be in the streets, to cause levels of violence, to exclude, to discriminate against. What we have seen and witnessed over the last 4 years was the invitation into the White House to allow this notion of white supremacy through Steve Miller and many others in the White House to make it okay for Charlottesville to exist, where individuals under this cloak and notion of some type of entitlement could march in Charlottesville, Virginia, with a chant against Blacks, against the Jewish community, against so many others. And the president, in response to that image, that negative image, holding tiki talks, reminiscence of Nazi Germany, spewing such vile language, reminiscence of the deep South racial oppressions of Blacks. For him to say that the counter protesters and those white supremacists, that there are good people on the other side, there are no good people. Whenever you have a scenario where those individuals seek to exclude, demean, dehumanize another community, there is no good in that. But he gave license. And because he gave license, within a 24-hour period, not soon after that, we've seen an individual seek to go to an African-American church in Louisville, Kentucky. Fortunately, the door was locked. And so he went to the grocery store and he killed people because they were Black. Within 24 hours, we've seen another individual go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and go to a synagogue and commit a massacre. Because that type of racism, anti-Semitic allowance was germinating from the White House, the most powerful house in this country, it opens up a place that's not safe for any of us. The role of the NAACP is to fight against that, to reestablish a public policy framework to not only create a disallowance for that behavior, but to make it illegal and go after anyone involved. Because if we don't, we will revisit some of the most painful periods in our global history of individuals being maligned, attacked, and dehumanized.
I have to say that wherever political violence is employed, we stand firmly against that, obviously in the strongest terms, and obviously wherever people are targeted because of their identity, whatever that identity may be, we obviously stand as strongly as we can in the firmest terms against that. And I think we can do much better or much stronger work when we work together. And in that sense, I saw you were featured in the film Shared Legacies, the African American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance. So for all of us who've seen this, and I think many of us in the JDCorps have seen it, you're a bit of a movie star in that regard. I'd like to ask you, do you think that shared legacy of Black Jewish alliance, of Rabbi Heschel marching arm in arm with Reverend Martin Luther King, do you think that still resonates today? Do you think it's still a force?
I think we must always revisit history so we can strengthen the future. I think over time we get comfortable with what history have shown us, and when we're successful, it's incumbent upon our communities to manage success successfully. So we don't begin to move so far away from the historical anchors that brought us to the day that we relax and we don't reinforce and we don't struggle together to make sure that the forces that can so easily align against us are able to do so. And so as I was talking to the young ladies who produced the film, and we was having a great dialogue about it, I say, you know, I know this history and I know many people who are part of it, but we also have to look at today. We also have to look at forward, and we must make sure we don't let forces and beliefs and emotions divide us. That none of us are a monolith. When I look at the Black community, we have never, nor should we ever be a monolith. My reading and understanding and being involved with members of the Jewish community, I'm very clear. The Jewish community has never been a monolith, nor should it never be. But as a Jewish community, as a Black community, we cannot allow outside influences or disagreements break us apart, because as easy as one of our communities have been subject to attack in the past, we can find ourselves in that same place. And as a Christian, myself as a Christian, there is a statement in the Old Testament, in the Torah: who will speak for those who cannot speak for themselves? I am driven by that. I'm driven by the fact that whenever I have a voice, I must speak up and out for those who find themselves voiceless. Because I know that there may be a time where I may lack a voice, and I need to look at my neighbor so that my neighbor who may have a voice can speak on my behalf. Because if we don't serve as one another's voices in times of need, there will not be anyone there to protect us, to sustain us, and to ensure that as communities we have a future, not only together, but at all.
How do you think we can serve as each other's voices? I very much agree with you. I think this is a universal teaching that goes beyond faith, beyond Christian faith or Jewish faith. It is a universal teaching that we should speak for one another and we should stand for one another. How do you think we can do so specifically as leaders of minority communities, and perhaps even more specifically, Black and Jewish communities, which exist in many parts of the world, actually?
You know, the beautiful thing about not being a monolith is to embrace the fact that we may not always agree, but we can disagree agreeably. That we must
Agreed.
also go to the core of who we are and recognize that in any family, there is a crazy uncle. And you may get so upset with your crazy uncle, but he's still family. And so in that vein, I was really proud when Jonathan Greenblatt and we began to talk about the need to push back against a social media platform like Facebook, who've caused so much harm to all of our communities, that have given license to white supremacist groups and other groups to convene on their platforms, recruit on their platforms, to carry out some of the most disastrous events that has not only caused harm, but have murdered people. And so through the summer, he and I, along with some other groups, we created Stop Hate for Profit, with a full recognition that together we could elevate the conversation against this platform that has grown to be a very successful but large company that lack any guardrails to protect people, to protect our democracy, to maintain a level of public discourse that allows for civility and not division. Those are the ways we can strengthen and revisit the history lessons of the 60s and apply to the present as we look towards the future.
Indeed, as the streets become virtual because of the pandemic and otherwise, I think we must make sure that we disagree agreeably, as you so agreeably said, even in the virtual streets. If I may ask, in the spirit of partnership, how does the NAACP combat other forms of racism, such as xenophobia, anti-Semitism? Is that part of the agenda of the organization?
Absolutely. This administration, they sought many ways to undo some of the successes of the Obama administration, one of which was an executive order that dealt with DACA. And many of you in the nation are familiar with DACA. It was a pathway created for individuals who came to this country outside of any control of their own. They were young kids who their parents brought here, and there was a need to create a pathway to citizenship, because the only country they know, for many cases, is the United States. And the administration was seeking to revoke DACA. And people were up in arms, and people seeing DACA as something that really applied to Mexicans or the Latino community. But for the NAACP, it went much farther than that. That anytime this nation commit to a social contract, and people rely on that contract for their safety, for their ability to fully engage, and we renege on that, that can happen to any of us at any time. So we filed a lawsuit, not because we have a lot of members from the Latino community, but because we see the inequity and the inherent danger to all of us as a result of that. But we also have members from the Caribbean, from the African continent, from the African diaspora. We have members who are from the Asian Pacific, because we're an organization that embraces all who would like to operate under our mission. That's one of the ways we address xenophobia. And we were successful. It was our case that went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed with us, NAACP versus Trump, that we won. That is the way we combat xenophobia. If you allow anti-Semitic behavior, language to exist, and it becomes the policy landscape, because racism is about structures. Racism is about public policy. You will have small-minded, ignorant people who may have certain views. Okay, you can't change people's heart or mind, but what we must always pay special attention to is when a set of beliefs become embedded in the public policy that governs us. When a set of beliefs are part of the structure that we rely on, that's the role of the NAACP. I fully accept that we cannot change the heart and mind, but we can never accept structures and public policy that allow for it to exist and fester. And that's what we fight against.
Do you think there are initiatives we could take together also to challenge problematic structures, but perhaps even go further and try to change hearts and minds? Perhaps our very partnership can help in changing those hearts and minds?
So hearts and minds are only changing, in my opinion, and maybe that's why I'm not a person of the cloth. I kind of study my faith, but I've never been one to get in a pulpit to, instruct people. It's only able to change if people are willing to hear, listen, and engage. Oftentimes, people who are myopic in their worldview is out of fear, and their unwillingness to, or inability to stretch out, or them feeling as if there is something given to anyone else, there's a level of scarcity that they might do without. I think over time that you exemplify what you would like to see take place. And so for me personally, for the organization, we must exemplify how we would like for people to see the possibility of being more open, to have more compassion, to develop spaces for empathy for neighbors, regardless of the disposition of the neighbor. The health of any society, in my opinion, is measured in three fundamental things. How well do we care for our elderly? Are we preparing our young people for a productive future where they can be contributors not only to their family, the community, to the nation? And do we protect the rights of the disadvantaged, however we define one's disadvantage? For me, that is the health of any society. And if we are able to do that and exemplify that, that opens the door for people to see their place so their hearts and their mind can be changed. But if we're unable to do that, we only lock people in to harden their hearts and mind in a space where it's exclusionary and they're not open for people who are different.
And in that very spirit, I'd like to ask you, it is my sense, and one of the things that we're working very hard at the World Jewish Congress to overcome, that one of the greatest dangers of our time is polarization. It is people seeing in the other something perhaps even evil, instead of perhaps something that you disagree with and you might want to change. How can we overcome this polarization, which is a self-feeding feedback loop, a negative feedback loop, unfortunately? Can we work together in some way to overcome that?
Absolutely. I always tell people we can never let the fringes of our community define the center gravities of our community. We must pull people towards the middle, because anytime we let the fringes of our community distract us and allow it to be the dominant narrative, we are all doomed. So in that vein, we have to push away from internal community tribalism as much as we push away from external tribalism. But also, let me back up. There's a great book I just finished called Caste, Isadora Wilkins. And she used some great examples in that book around the history of the caste system. And in many cases, she used three primary communities, the untouchables in India, the African Americans here, and here in the United States, and the Jewish community during the time leading up to the Holocaust, during and after. And she talked about how the lowest common denominators of men's fear created such a frenzy that they were willing to do some of the most disastrous, inhumane things to people. And she used example after example after example. The past 2 weeks, I've seen what could have been. Yesterday is a good example in Washington, D.C. The incidents after the election and how people began to respond. And we are at a tipping point, I believe, where things could go either way if we allow the narrative and this momentum to continue. As communities, we must do all we can to suffocate that beastly desire to treat a neighbor less than human out of fear. And much of that fear right now is driven by false and misleading information concerning one's predicament in life. It is easy for a set of individuals to excuse away another's predicament based on a group taking something from them. You are in this predicament because the Black community have taken your jobs. You are in this predicament because the Jewish community have done that. And that's what we are facing right now. You're having so many people in middle America who are living through levels of pain and fear and economic anxiety and, unfortunately, chemical dependency because of the fear and pain and economic anxiety. And this fallacy of white supremacy is unfolding to be completely untrue. They're looking at something or someone or something to blame and not accept the fact that they have been misled for decades. And so for our communities, we have to be able to pull people away from the fringes, put them in the center, and mature one's understanding there is no supreme race. There are many people that God created. And because she created all of us in many ways, and I put emphasis, because my belief system is God is universal, there's no gender. And I say that because we also have to address the fact that gender discrimination also exists, and put people in the center and allow things to mature so people can get away from blaming other communities for their lack and focus on the public policy infrastructure that are robbing the aspirations of so many people. We can only do that together. We cannot do that separated.
Very much agreed. And in that spirit, we have on this call Jewish community leaders, as well as our friends who are faith and minority community leaders from over 50 countries, many of whom are working to try and bridge differences between different communities, different either minority or majority communities. And I want to ask you as a last question, speaking to a group of community leaders here, many of whom emerging leaders, many of whom already established leaders, what advice could you give all of us in trying to build that better society that we're speaking of for the past hour or so?
Strategic empathy. Strategic empathy to understand that even in our successes, we must see what would the other side look like, and how does it feel to those who feel outside of our communities in the midst of success? And what can we do to mitigate any harm that potentially can be that's being caused, even if it's unintentional? That strategic empathy allows for us to take our pieces of our solutions, because none of us have the total solutions, we all have a piece, and bring those pieces together. And as we settle in on success, understand that there may be others not a part of this, and what can we do to share in success to make a more beloved community? I think that is the most important thing at all. Because if we take our success and we flaunt it, and we isolate and we ignore and we lack any empathy, we only build up resentment over time. And with that resentment, it could be next year, it could be 10 years, it could be, 5 decades later, it could be the next generation. We could position ourselves to a level of harm that could have simply been avoided by simply seeing the world from the view of others who may not be a part of the community you come from.
So in the spirit of that empathy and that brotherhood, I would like to thank you very much for these wise words, and to hope for a continued, very meaningful, hopefully very impactful partnership between us, between all of us together. Thank you very much. This is exactly what this conference aspires to be all about, and what we aspire to be about. And we really thank you both for your partnership and for these wise words. And I would just thank you. Just want to say two things in conclusion. One, this whole conference started as an idea of the Jewish diplomats, our volunteers, our volunteer corps. It started bottom up and then grew with the help of our amazing dedicated staff to the beautiful thing that you see today. So I have to thank both the leaders on the ground for their initiative, and the staff and all of our guests for the great work in bringing all of us together, which is what we try to do. And also important to say is that I'm here last minute as a replacement of our dear friend, Dr. Sonat Hart, who was supposed to lead this discussion. She fell ill in the last minute, and I'm sure that you will all join me in sending our dear friend Sonat best wishes for a speedy recovery. Thank you very much, President Johnson. And with that, I would like to turn it over to another dear friend, Tamara Fathi, who will lead a panel of distinguished guests. Over to you, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, as well. That was truly enlightening and really, really wonderful to have you here. So good afternoon and evening to everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion with global faith leaders on the importance of unity. As Ellie said, my name is Tamara Fathi, and I am a member of the steering committee of the JDCorps, and I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. For the first 30 minutes, we will hear from our distinguished panelists. After this time, we will open it up to Q&A. You can raise your virtual hand and you will be unmuted when called upon. But you can also write a question in the chat box and I will read it on your behalf if that is your preference. So let's get started. It is an absolute privilege for me to introduce our esteemed panelists. Dr. Mustafa Cherish is a native of Bosnia-Herzegovina, where he graduated from the Gazi Hurstfebeg Madrasa in Sarajevo. He has studied at the Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, and earned a PhD at the University of Chicago in Islamic Studies. Dr. Cherish returned in 1986 to his homeland to become a practicing imam in a learning center in Zagreb. In 1991, he accepted the offer to teach at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization in Kuala Lumpur. While in Malaysia, Dr. Cherish was elected in 1993 in absentia as the Grand Mufti of Bosnia, the supreme head of the Islamic community of Bosnia-Herzegovina. He returned in May 1993 to the besieged city of Sarajevo. Dr. Cherish assumed the tenure of Grand Mufti of Bosnia, elected as the youngest ever, and held this position for 20 years, which is the longest tenure of any in the history of this unique spiritual institution in Europe. Dr. Cherish led the Islamic community in Bosnia as the supreme head, the Grand Mufti of Bosnia, from 1993 to 2012, in times of war and in times of peace, making a great impact on domestic as well as international issues regarding truth, justice, peace, and reconciliation. After leaving the office of the Grand Mufti of Bosnia, Dr. Cherish was visiting professor at the World Islamic Sciences and Education University in Amman, Jordan. Dr. Cherish is an advocate of cross-cultural engagement as well as a peace activist. In 2003, he received the UNESCO Peace Award together with Cardinal Echegaray. Dr. Cherish is currently the president of the World Bosniak Congress, as well as an active member in many local and international scientific organizations and societies, such as the Interreligious Council of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Executive Committee of the European Council of Religious Leaders, International Commission for Peace Research in UNESCO. Dr. Cherish is also special advisor to Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, president of the Forum for Promoting Peace in Muslim Societies. Welcome, Dr. Cherish. Our next panelist is Ms. Simin Fahandej. She's a representative of the Baha'i International Community's United Nations office in Geneva, having joined the office in 2011. Her work focuses primarily on human rights, peace and security, and migration. Ms. Fahandej has served as a Baha'i International Community delegate to the Commission on the Status of Women, the Commission on Sustainable Development, and the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. She has also been involved with the Major Group for Children and Youth, including as editor-in-chief for the 7th Annual Youth Assembly at the UN. Ms. Fahandej has conducted research consultancies for various organizations such as Amnesty International, Noble Women Initiative, and the Center for Defenders of Human Rights. Prior to joining the Baha'i International Community, Ms. Fahandej worked as a journalist at various news outlets, including here in Canada for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Ms. Fahandej holds a combined honors degree in journalism and political science from the University of King's College in Canada and a master's degree in international law from SOAS in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Ms. Fahandej. Our third panelist is Dr. Andrea Bartoli. Dr. Bartoli is the president of Sant'Egidio Foundation for Peace and Dialogue. He works primarily on peacemaking, and genocide prevention. He is a member of the steering group of the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes, a member of the Global Steering Committee chaired by the United Nations Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and a member of the UNHCR Multi-Religious Council of Leaders. Dr. Bartoli has been a member of the community of Sant'Egidio since 1970. He was its representative to the UN and the USG from 1992 to 2018. He was the convener of the Genocide Prevention Advisory Network, the dean of the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, and of the School of Diplomacy at Seton Hall University. He was also the founding director of the Center for International Conflict Resolution at Columbia University. He is a visiting fellow at the Advanced Consortium on Cooperation, Conflict, and Complexity at Columbia University. Welcome, Dr. Bartoli. My first question is to you, Dr. Cherish. In 2006, you issued the Declaration of European Muslims to the European Union, stating that European Muslims are dedicated to the common values of law, tolerance, democracy, and human rights, the value of life, faith, freedom, property, and dignity. I was hoping you could elaborate further on this and the manner by which you promote respect and religious pluralism.
Thank you, Mrs. Tamara Fathi. Did I pronounce good?
Yes, you did. That was excellent.
Good evening from Sarajevo. And I just want to inform you that Sarajevo is at peace. So don't worry, no any more world wars if Sarajevo, the second Jerusalem, is at peace. So before I answer your question, I would like to thank to the president of the Jewish World Congress, Ronald Lauder, for his introduction. And I learned something from him that probably I was not aware before. And that is that we have to join forces in order to confront. These days I am reading a book exactly about this. You can see from Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum. This book I am reading these days exactly. So when I received the invitation from Mr. Daniel Radomski to attend your conference, I was wondering, why did you select me for this conference? Well, I thought probably because I am Grand Mufti retired, so not active anymore. And where you are in retirement, you can speak out more freely than when you are caught by the official procedures. So that probably I can represent Islam and Muslims in this time, which is not very easy for us, I must tell you. We are not minority on a global scene, but we are minority in many aspects. So we can share the fears and hopes that the Jewish people felt in Europe and around the world. And then I thought probably you invited me because I am from Bosnia. And we share something. And that is the experience of being somehow not wanted in Europe. When I speak about Bosnia, I speak about the land of heretics. You know that Bosnia is somehow on the exact line between the East and the West. And my people from a long time of history suffered because they were treated like Catars as heretics. And somehow we are still in such a position. And I am very proud to be heretic in Europe, I must tell you. Because the heretics in many ways have changed the course of history exactly in Europe. I don't want to tell to the Jewish people how they should feel about being heretic in Europe, but I know that America is made of heretics anyway. So I am here in these two positions, and I can speak to you about my experience of Bosnia, and then the bigger burden on me is to speak on Islam and Muslims, 1 billion and almost 2 billion people. I am very small to speak on behalf of such a great number of people. But then then let me share with you, and I'm very proud to say, and very, very proud of my grandfathers who saved the Jewish people, Sephardis, who came from Spain in 1492. And you know that we have this Jewish Haggadah, Sarajevo Haggadah, which we are very proud of. Now, why I am telling you this today in 2020, you know, what my grandfathers did in that period, I don't need to tell you the story, you know it. I benefited here and my children in Bosnia, because when the genocide occurred in my country, the World Jewish Congress, the Jewish people anywhere felt this danger more than we are in Bosnia. And you stood with us what our grandfathers earned. And therefore, I would advise everybody, do for your children now, for they will need it in the future when you are not around. This is why we need this unity against hate. Therefore, I am very proud to be part of this program that you have. You can count on me. I owe you something to be with you in this camp, because denying of Holocaust is as denying the genocide that is happening to me now, to us. So I know how you feel when somebody denies and say that Holocaust didn't happen. And this is how I know, because I know how I feel when people say that genocide didn't happen to my people. I am not proud of the genocide that happened to my people. But then the denial of genocide is genocide in itself. So the one who is denying Holocaust and genocide is prepared and ready to commit genocide and Holocaust again. And this is why I feel to be one of them. And if I may say, probably you thought about it and you invited me. So let me now say about something being a Muslim in Europe. And you rightly pointed out, I am very proud of Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya and his program. I think that the Jewish, World Jewish Congress must help the program of this peace movement that started with Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, but also the Forum for Peace started by Abu Dhabi leadership and Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya also is in the position to help the World Jewish Congress, and not only Jewish Congress, but also across the religious communities. Now, if I, probably this is a good time for us to remember late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And I would like to offer my condolences to the Jewish community all around the world. I knew him from our work in Davos, World Economic Forum. We had something called
Imam Mustafa, I believe you're muted.
Okay. I just was saying that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was not only the rabbi for the Jewish people. He knew how to speak to others. And why I am one of them to whom he was able to communicate in such a way that I may say we did like each other. Now, when we come to the question of Islam in the world today, I must share something with you probably for the first time, as I was thinking, especially what was happening recently in Vienna, in Paris, in other places. We Muslims are faced with the fake Muslims. And we have difficulty to distinguish now who is the true and fake Muslim. And when I say fake Muslims, I mean those who use the very sacred word Allahu Akbar, and by this slogan, they are killing innocent people. I don't know who are those people, but I can say that they are fake to represent anything of me as a Muslim and my children. But at the same time, I would say that if we Muslims recognize that there are some fake people, some fake places, faces of Islam, then we can also see that there are some fake faces of other ideologies that are there, including the humanists, who are saying they are speaking in the name of humanism, but hurting other people is not in the name of humanism. And the same thing, like we know this famous story about Breivik, who killed 69 young people, and he did not feel any sense of this of remorse for what he was doing. Now, in the previous discussion, I heard we are saying about the heart and mind, but we should add also the hand. Why? The heart is of emotion, love or hate. The mind is the place of thought, right or wrong. The hand is the tool of power, justice or injustice. So the question may be asked, what is the tipping scale for the heart from love to hate? What makes the mind to think right or wrong? And what causes the hand to do injustice or injustice? Then what is the role of faith, religion in harmonizing the human heart, mind, and hand? If I may say, I am disappointed with the spiritual leaders today. I think that they must be active. We live in the time of confusion. People are today confused by their identities, by their tribes, by their origins. And what it means, what we should do, we should teach the heart and say that the heart is not a pump that drives the blood, but it is the blood of love that drives the heart to love. That the mind is not a vessel to be filled by anything, but the light to be kindled. And that the hand is not a tool to be abused, but a means to be used for justice. What is for me today the most challenging thing is to distinguish between faith and dogma or ideology. Why? Because we have to know that faith is loving memory of God, living memory of God. Dogma is an inherited thought of religion. Faith is a personal experience of belief. Dogma is an instructive ideology. Faith is a natural state of heart. Dogma is an artificial state of mind. Faith illuminates the soul. Dogma darkens the mind. Faith is deep feeling of soul. Dogma is a shallow knowledge of the mind. Faith is purity of the soul. Dogma is dirtiness of the mind. Faith is natural morality. Dogma is artificial hypocrisy. Faith is secrecy, the secret of the heart. Dogma is the conspiracy of the mind. Pure faith is salvation. Dirty dogma is not. So what we can do together, we can do together by making our hearts closer to each other and find the love in it instead of hate. We can be closer to enlighten our mind. We need now the enlightenment of the mind, the new enlightenment, because this confusion that we are living now in the world by the idea that we as the humanity still think in the sense of tribal or racial or ideological or religious differences, instead of making the law of God is not in the book, the law is in the heart. So if anything we should do today for our children is to take care of our heart to love, of our mind to think right, and our hand to do justice. If we are capable to do so, may God bless us all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very meaningful indeed. I will move on to Ms. Fahandej, if I may. The first question for you, Ms. Fahandej, is that I understand that the notion that every nation, community, and person has a part to play in building a peaceful and prosperous global society is central to the work of the Baha'i international community. Can you please speak to us a little bit about the work your community is doing and how you combat hate in all its forms?
Thank you. First of all, on behalf of the Baha'i international community, I wanted to thank you so much for the invitation to join in such an important and timely event on the subject of racism and prejudice, which is, as we all know, very relevant for today's reality in many, many countries and regions of the world, and especially to create a space for discussion on the role of faith groups and religious actors in overcoming this issue. The principles of racial equality and racial unity are central to the Baha'i teachings. And as you may know, the central principle around which all the Baha'i teachings revolve is the principle of the oneness of humanity. And although this concept seems deceptively simple, it has far-reaching implications for every level of society. It essentially aims to construct relationships between the three protagonists in society, so the individual, the institutions, and the communities, in a way that all systems, policies, and structures that are adopted and are developed embody and apply in practice the idea that all humanity is essentially one, and that every human being, despite their race, color, nationality, and even religion, is first and foremost a human being. In Baha'i writings, racism is actually seen as a spiritual disease, as one of the major barriers to peace. And at the heart of any question of discrimination, including questions of race, is the question of human identity. Throughout history, one of the features of humanity's civilization building has been this capacity to compose identities based on real or imagined differences. And for centuries, groups and individuals that have sought to divide people and dominate over them have invoked these real or imagined differences in order to create divisions for their own self-interests. And over time, these differences have solidified and become stereotyped constructs related to race, gender, nationality, and ethnicity, and the very fragmented social reality and identities that we see today is in part a consequence of these very narrow identity constructs. But beyond these fragmented ways of defining ourselves and others, there have also been efforts by many, especially religious communities, and we've seen some of the examples here today, to broaden human consciousness by drawing attention to the most essential aspect of human nature, which is the inner reality that is shared by all, regardless of those differences. And at the collective level, this shared identity, which is actually spiritual in nature, serves as the basis for regarding all of humanity as one. And it becomes really this primary identity by which we define ourselves. And so this primary and overarching human identity, which is rooted in the human soul and which has no race, as we know, the soul has no race or gender or nationality, can be developed in many ways, and in ways that allows for many secondary also aspects of human diversity to emerge and to be able to manifest themselves without infringing on the rights of others. And this shared identity can override differences and inspire action by uniting people and leading them to cooperate. And in fact, the problem of racism and discrimination cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict, as we've seen for much of history. And it must be established by creating just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift and not designate anyone as the other. And so this change that is required needs the efforts of religious communities and religious leaders, especially as was mentioned, because the change is not merely social and economic, but actually above all moral and spiritual. Since the establishment of the Baha'i faith, Baha'is and the Baha'i community have considered the task of rooting out prejudice and discrimination as a sacred obligation for the Baha'i community, and have become involved in diverse efforts to address prejudice and racism. At the local and national levels, Baha'is work to create models of unity in neighborhoods and communities with this belief that every individual has a part to play and should have a part to play in contributing to their societies and in the communities in which they live. These include, for example, community prayer gatherings where people of all backgrounds are invited to join to share prayers from all faith scriptures. And these serve as a foundation for discussion and prayers. They also include activities that are organized with neighbors and friends for children, young adults, and adults, where participants join from all religious or non-religion background and racial backgrounds, and they come together to discuss and study moral and spiritual concepts, which allows participants to develop their individual and collective capacities to build unity and peace and inclusive communities. At the international level, the Baha'i community has been deeply involved in many spaces which explore ways to address questions of discrimination, prejudice, and racism for decades, and they have been present for the most significant global events in this regard. We know that racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality, and what is perhaps needed more than anything is a recognition that everyone, all people, constitute a single race, a single species, whose many variations don't in themselves confer any advantage or impose any disadvantage on individual members of the race. And so the recognition of the oneness of humanity and the oneness of mankind implemented by appropriate legal and political measures must be universally upheld if this problem is to be overcome.
Thank you so much.
Stayed within my time limit. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Thank you. That's great. I'll now move on to Dr. Bartoli. Welcome. A question for you. Combating online hate is significant to all of us and manifests itself as attacks against other visible minorities, as we've seen over and over again throughout time. In Canada, here we've utilized strategic partnerships and alliances as we seek to educate Canadians about genocide awareness, minority and LGBTQ+ rights. I'd like to ask you, how do we collectively impact public and private policy for the betterment of all minorities and ensure the prevention of genocide?
Thank you. It's a great question. So it's a very challenging one. I'm delighted that you give me a chance to address it, even though I must say that my first reaction after hearing so many speaking would be to be silent for a while. But taking your questions about how to collectively impact public and private policy, I would say that the first things I think is important to recognize that we are truly in a system creation phase. This very conversation is an expression of it. You know, we do things that we could not do 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We engage differently. And I think that the awareness of this system creation phase is very important. And as you mentioned, this Canadian experience, it's very important for me to realize that through Canada, I've been involved in this conversation between IRA and GAMAC, between the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and the Global Action Against Mass Atrocity Crimes, where we are trying to move the commitment to the memory of the Holocaust, the remembrance of the Holocaust, to the prevention of mass atrocities worldwide. And I think that Ambassador Lauder was speaking at the beginning about leadership, and I think that because we are in a system creation phase, we must accept the challenges of building something that is not there yet. And so there is a requirement in many ways asked from all of us to be attentive, to be intelligent, to be reasonable, to be responsible, because otherwise what we are going to contribute is not going to be needed, and it's not going to be effective. So my strong recommendation would be to engage the state and take seriously states. You know, states are very difficult constructs. In the past century, you know, more people were killed by states than by wars. States can be very little, and we definitely want to make sure that states are actually built in such a way that they are respectful. And when they have a long history, again, you know, nice to have a conversation with a Canadian. Canadian use this expression of First Nations, you know, people that were there before Canada was. And Canada today must take into account its own history to understand its future. Well, this relationship is a relationship between the society and the state. So how can we collectively impact public and private policy? Well, taking seriously both the society and the states. But I think that, again, I want to stress in this conversation with young diplomats, you know, with Jewish diplomats that are dedicated to this, really to sense this dimension of the world becoming. There is a responsibility of creating something that is not there yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I really want to build on that. I'll ask, I know we're already at the 30-minute, a little bit over the 30-minute mark, and I will open up the questions to my fellow JDs, but just going off of that, you know, how do we engage? How do you see, Dr. Bartoli, and I'll throw this question out to everyone, but start with you, Dr. Bartoli. How do we engage with the growing segment of the world's population, certainly in the West, that really doesn't affiliate with any religious group? And so in addition to this, what recommendations would you have for the JDs when we engage with members of your respective communities, as we will be doing in the next couple of weeks?
So I am a Roman Catholic, and I'm definitely a devout Christian. I think that we should not underestimate the power of personal responsibility and personal encounter. I think that 99% of the work will be done one-to-one. I don't think that there is any alternative to accepting the fact that we need to encounter one another. But I think that it's also important to share stories. I come from Rome, and every October 16, you know, the day in which the Jewish community was taken by the Nazi to be brought to Auschwitz and then the camps, there is now a memory that is shared by the community of Sant'Egidio, by the city, by others. And I think that memories of this kind are actually open to everybody. I was touched by our Baha'i colleague, mentioning these moments of prayers where you welcome everybody. And I definitely think that the Jewish community is extraordinarily rich in this sense, because you definitely have a lot of secular Jews, and you don't have only Orthodox, observant, practicing one. And I think that it is actually a gift to be able to connect with the community as the community is. I think that there is no point in thinking that we are still in somehow a religiously constructed world. We are not. We are in a very open world. But I think that that's my experience, in universities, in many different settings. People are actually interested in the future that is coming, in the idea that everyone is needed, in the fact that past experiences can be revisited for future commitments and so on. So my strong recommendation to the JD is to take themselves seriously, take their relationship seriously, and take the specificity of where they are seriously. Because I'm sure that, like October 16 in Rome, there are many other memories, there are many other things. We heard before about the American slavery and African-American conditions and so on. There is this beautiful, beautiful new memorial created in Montgomery, Alabama, where all the lynchings, more than 4,000 lynching in the US, are remembered. I definitely think that we need to engage the society where the society is and the people where the people are. Thank you.
Thank you. That's excellent advice. Before I move on to Ms. Fahandej, I just wanted to remind the JDs to put your questions in the chat or raise your virtual hand, because we'll get to that shortly. But Ms. Fahandej, just over to you on that question and what advice you can give to the JDs.
Thank you. It's a good question. I think that there is somehow, not somehow, I think we know why, but there's a mistrust of religion in the world that we see today among people of faith and no faith, actually. And so I think one of the first things to do is really to, I guess, build up the reputation of religion and religious actors, and especially for religious leaders to really live up to their responsibility to see everybody as one. And I think it really starts with, we're talking about interfaith activities. It really starts with also between religions. There are, of course, differences, but how do we overcome some of these differences between the different religions so that it doesn't look disunified to those, for example, who may be skeptical about religion. And then I also think that in the way that we look at each other, not to think of each other as someone who has religion and someone who doesn't have religion, because these types of mindsets also create the other mentality. So thinking of others as other, but thinking of all of us as one and as us. So I think it requires really a shift in mindset, which I think is probably the most difficult one, even more difficult than creating new policies, is creating, we were talking about changing hearts and minds. I think the most difficult thing to do is creating change in mindsets, which is, I think, what's really, really needed.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think I would agree with you wholeheartedly. Changing mindsets is a real, it's one of the biggest challenges that we face, most definitely. Dr. Cherish, your thoughts, please.
You asked me to advise you how you are going to approach these challenges. Well, from my experience, I would say, not advise, that sharing the concerns with you. In my experience of the interfaith dialogue, it was always the question whether the religious leaders should speak to each other or...
Sorry, we can't hear you again, Dr. Cherish.
I don't know what's happening.
Now we can.
Now? Okay. what is the interfaith dialogue only for the leaders, or is it for the grassroots as well? And how can we reach these people? We call them ordinary or common people. Well, in my experience, I would say that the problem has never been in grassroots people, in ordinary people. The ordinary people don't have prejudices against each other. They cooperate. We know from our experience in the post-war recovery, the common people get very easy with each other at peace. The leaders are problem. So I would advise that the next stage or next program should be working with the leaders. The leaders are the one that instigate the grassroots to hate or to love, or to do something that even they don't believe, but when they see that people are buying what they are saying, then they become more extreme in that. So we need to work or encourage the religious leaders, political leaders, and those who have the influence on the mindset and in the hearts of the people, how we can change their mindset so that they can be at peace with themselves, and then pass these ideas to the grassroots, which are innocent. The ordinary people are innocent. They like each other and they can cooperate. If anyone knows this fact, I think the Sant'Egidio program and the movement for peace reconciliation, they know. They show that in my city of Sarajevo, it was the most amazing and the most reconciling meeting that we had in Europe, I think, in Sarajevo city. So I would like to use this opportunity to thank to Sant'Egidio, and I hope that they did not give up and are not disappointed, and I think they have to have more innovative and more creative ideas.
We didn't give up.
Good, very good. Which we can also help. And of course, the problem of the world of the 21st century is that we need spiritual revolution. We need spiritual revolution. We need to discover what is the spirit of the time, and the spirit what Hegel was talking about. And the spirit of the time is peace. Without peace, we are extinct as humanity. So peace is not anymore like academic pleasure or something that we talk just to feel praised by our ideas. The question of peace is the question of our human existence. So
Absolutely.
Therefore, we have to work all together.
Yes, absolutely. We must work together. Thank you so much. I think one of our JDs, I'll move over to the JDs who have questions. Dr. Efrat Sofer has a question. So I'm trying to unmute you, Efrat, but I'm not sure if I can. There we go. So,
Thank you so much, Tamara, and a warm hello from London. I'd love to thank the panel for your very, very inspiring words. And I was wondering whether I could take the opportunity to ask you for a little bit of practical best practice advice. As Jewish diplomats, we engage with governments and decision makers on battling anti-Semitism and anti-racism and hate. how would you recommend to us when you are representing sensitive, vulnerable communities, how do you engage with governments while also preventing any reprisals for speaking out against injustice and against hatred? So, for example, against legislation that is against Baha'i rights, for example. It would be really, really interesting to hear your perspective on that, and your whether you could share any thoughts on how you tackle both sides in engaging with the governments and in protecting your communities at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks, Afret. Ms. Fahandej, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very, very good question, because as it's been mentioned, minority groups everywhere face discrimination. As many of you know, the Baha'i community in Iran has faced systematic government-sponsored persecution for the past 4 decades, and so the Baha'i community has garnered some experience in responding to persecution, of course. And the method of the Baha'i community, of course, is that of conciliation. Often is not one of conflict or going against the government or protesting against the government in any way. And for many years, the Baha'i community in Iran sought to resolve the issues with, themselves through legal measures with the government, through going to courts, asking for their rights in every legal way possible. And since that was not possible after many, many years, then the Baha'i community, of course, took it upon itself to create international awareness in international settings at the UN and other places in support of the Baha'i community in Iran. So I think there's a mode of functioning which is trying to resolve these situations with conciliation, and really with the perpetrators themselves, trying to give a chance to the perpetrators themselves to kind of maybe rectify the mistakes, and then if that's not possible, then to really take the measures that are needed to then stand up for the rights of the persecuted at the international level. I don't know if that answers your question, but just trying to be brief as well.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question from Sarah Gallico in Mexico to everyone on the panel. And she says, amazing panel, so yes, thank you. But what do you think the impact of this pandemic and crisis on religious groups? Do you think it has made them stronger? Perhaps we could start with you, Dr. Bartoli.
Yes, I think so. I think that religious groups are networks, clearly realities that are there before the states in many ways, and present in many places where the states is having difficulties being present. So I would say that generally speaking, religions do come out strong in these moments of crisis. But I would actually make an argument in terms of this COVID experience that is remarkably reminding all of us that we are one. We are biologically one, and the virus could care less if you are Jews or if you are Christian, if you are Muslim, or if you are Baha'i. We are one, period. It's just very clear. And I think that there is something refreshing about the fact that 7 billion people woke up one morning and say, well, actually, we are one. And we have this entity that is a funny entity even to explain to people, what a virus really is, and how much the virus is alive and not alive, and what is this and not is that. But there is an extraordinary investment, for example, of understanding science, understanding how did we even understand that the virus exists? What are the ways in which humans became aware of what was causing what was happening to us. So I really would like to actually say not that religions are stronger, but that humanity is getting stronger insofar we are using the virus as a way to see that after a long time, humanity has definitely developed capacities for understanding that were not shared 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So I think that there is a responsibility of this knowing. So once we know that we have this capacity, how are we going to use it? And this seems to be the question for the future.
Absolutely. Dr. Cherish, would you like to respond as well?
Yes, very, very shortly. The tiny COVID enemy made us aware how fragile are we. And at the same time, it makes us stronger in our belief of our human unity. I wish we became united by love, not by fear. But we are now united by the fear of this small, tiny enemy that even we don't even see it. So what we should learn from this experience is that nothing is for nothing. There must be the reason why we are tested with this COVID. And we are tested because we thought at the time that we live as if God does not exist and that we can replace God. So why should God play with us if we can play with God? Now, this is a big philosophical and religious question, theological, that should be addressed in a different way. But I think that this COVID, I hope it will end. We will find a vaccine for it. But at the time, even now, I am speaking to you from Sarajevo in this way. So I feel closer now to you than even if I am physically with you. So I feel your spirit, I feel your heart, I feel your love with all your different faces. And I just want to say, I love you all. I like you all. And I wish all of you the best. So to just say to your question, what is the advice? The advice is that we should not give up on human rights, speaking on human rights. Even to those who don't listen to that, we should speak out all the time. The human rights and democracy have no alternative. So sooner or later, people who don't recognize human rights will recognize them.
We certainly hope so, and that's certainly something that us at the JDCorps that we strive towards. Ms. Fahandej, would you like the opportunity? I'll give you the opportunity to answer that last question as well before we move on to, I think, what will be the final question. So,
thank you. This is still the question about the pandemic, right?
Yeah, about the pandemic, exactly.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that the pandemic has really challenged religious communities all over the world in some ways. And I think the biggest challenge, or perhaps one of the biggest challenges, has been for religious communities to think about the relationship between religion and science. So I'm part of this faith network with the World Health Organization here in Geneva, and this network of faith-based organizations have actually only started after the pandemic. And it's very nice to see these religious communities in different countries, different regions, thinking about how the faith communities can be increasing science awareness, health awareness among their communities. And, whether it's distributing masks or just talking to their faith groups about the importance of, for example, heeding the calls of WHO or other health organizations. It's a very nice collaboration that has begun after the pandemic, because I think, and this is, you know, one of the principles of the Baha'i faith is the harmony between science and religion, and that science and religion are two systems of knowledge that humanity needs in order to see reality, basically. So the world needs scientific knowledge, of course, but it needs religious knowledge in order to, in a way, instill morality into what we do with that scientific knowledge. So I think this is something that's the pandemic has really challenged religious communities to really think in this way.
Yeah, certainly it's challenged in many ways, and ways to think differently of how to reach each of the, whether people are involved and engaged in the communities or not, and trying to even engage further. So thank you. I think we'll go to our final question, which comes from Jonathan Bierman. So he says, thank you for the inspiring thoughts that you've been sharing. Dr. Cherish mentioned some critics towards the current lack of leadership, and Dr. Bartoli gave us the advice of working one-on-one. Faith and religion were fundamental ways to share a sense of morality. What will enforce or replace this? What do we use to combat fake news and the lack of trust in each other? So perhaps, Dr. Cherish, I'll start with you.
What will enforce or replace it? What do we use to combat fake news and lack of trust in each other? As I said, the law is not in the book, the law is in the heart. So we have to see how we can make our heart to love instead of hate, the mind to think right instead of wrong, and also using the hand for justice, not for injustice. This is how the people, the leaders or the leadership must have these three things: the power of heart, of love, the power of mind, of good thinking, goodwill, if you like, and the power of hand to do justice, not injustice. And this is the question of human rights anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Bartoli. Given the time, we'll give you the last word, and then I'll pass it back over to Gabriel. So Dr. Bartoli, your thoughts?
Thank you. I actually will tell a Christian story that may help complexify the response a little bit, because there was in Europe in 1500, after the split between Protestant and Catholic, a small minority of Anabaptists that decided that Christians should not be baptized when they are young, but when they are old. And they were considered heretics, as Mustafa Cherish was mentioning before. Heretics are interesting because they force communities to see themselves differently. So Derrick Williams was condemned as an heretic, and therefore this idea that religion and morality and enforcement, can play in a difficult way, I think it's important for us to realize. But what was interesting is that he actually ended up being able to flee. In the winter of Holland, he is fleeing through the canals, and then guards are running after him. One of them fell into the canal, the ice breaks, the guy is sinking, is drowning. Derrick comes back, saves the man out of drowning, out of the water. He's a prisoner again. He is in prison and killed legally because he's an heretic. Now, I am Catholic, and I am with the community that killed Derrick, and Protestant would have done the same. My sense is that religions can now have conversation we couldn't have before. This is an intra-Christian conversation. And I'm sure that there are very interesting intra-Jewish conversations. Rabin was not killed by a Muslim. Rabin was killed by a Jew. And Muslim then must have intra-Muslim conversations, because I definitely think that, yes, religion and morality were connected, but were connected in such weird way and not always helpful for the good of everyone. And I do think that I am completely in agreement with Sachs about the horizon of the good of all. I think that the greatest gift is the fact that we are now ready to see that whatever we do, whatever prayer we share, whatever word we give, whatever action we do, we should always think of the good of everyone, not just me, not just mine, but everyone. And I think that in that sense, we will discover one by one this discipline of the rights of others, of the rights of life, of the rights of the future, and so on. But this is a great conversation.
Yes, thank you. And certainly that is a great message to end on. So I'd like to take the opportunity now just to thank each of our panelists. It's been a real pleasure having each of you here with us, and thank you for sharing your enlightened thoughts with us. And I will pass it back over to Gabriel, and apologies that we are a couple of minutes late.
Thank you, Tamara, to you. A great moderation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tamara, very much appreciated. And I just want to conclude this session by thanking all of our speakers for being with us here tonight. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you to Ambassador Lauder, to Daniel Radomski, Derrick Johnson, Eli Novershtern, Andrea Bartoli, Mustafa Cheric, Simin Fahandej, and of course, Tamara Fati. We really appreciate you taking the time, and it's been a really fascinating evening for all of us. Thank you so much for being here with us. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.